How would you deal? Ladies, this question is for you tonight. If you find out that your husband has been cheating on you and he has a child with another woman, if you realize, ladies, this question is for you. If your husband, you find out that your husband has been cheating on you and he got another woman pregnant, how would you deal with that situation? Would you forgive your husband, or would you leave, get a divorce, leave the marriage and get a divorce? How would you deal with the situation? This Bible don't have any reference or so you can look for, but I think it is in the book of Matthew. So guys, the question for tonight is, how would you deal with the situation where you find out that your husband has been cheating with you and he has a child with another woman? And we are going to look at Matthew. Matthew, because I think the book of Matthew deal with that situation. Matthew, in the book of Matthew, the disciples asked Jesus about marriage and divorce. And Jesus replied to them. So tonight, I want to ask you the question, ladies, how would you deal a situation, or how would you handle a situation where you find out that your husband has been cheating with you and now he has a child out of with another woman? How would you deal with that situation, ladies? And men, I want you to, if you're in the, I want you to tell me if you have any experience of you um, being unfaithful to your wife and have a child outside of the marriage, and how did your wife interact with you? Did she forgive you, or did she file for a divorce? So men, your answer is important just the same way. So, Matthew, in the book of Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples, I think it was Peter, that asked Jesus the question, why, um, why did Moses give you know, a bill of divorce? Why? And under what circumstances should a man leave his wife, or what circumstances should a husband or a wife get a divorce? First of all, Jesus said unto them, it was because of the hardness of their heart that Moses commanded them to get a bill of divorce. But if they had forgiven each other, you know, then there would be no need for forgiveness, because Jesus is saying to them that Jesus is the groom, and we, the Christian, we his followers, are the bride. And if he can forgive us, we are the church, and he so we, the church, is his bride, and he is the groom. And if he can forgive us every time we commit fornication, we lie, we steal, we do all manner of things, and if he can forgive us of our sins, Jesus is saying that even though Moses right give them tell them if there's adultery in the marriage, then they can file for a divorce, and that was the only reason, the only um circumstances in which a man and a woman was supposed to get divorced. If there was adultery in the marriage, a man can put away his wife, or a wife can put away her husband. It was only that under that circumstances, and Jesus was saying, if the partners, if the couple can find it in their heart to forgive each other just as how he forgive us, then there would be no divorce. But because of the hardness of the heart, that a man will put away his wife, or a wife will put away his husband. But he was saying that, when God, therefore shall a man leave his wife, his mother and father shall cling to his wife, and they shall become one. The Bible don't encourage divorce as all possible. Jesus wants us to keep our marriage, because when we come together as one, when we form a marriage that is instituted by God, because not all marriages are instituted by God. Not all marriage are instituted by God. Not all marriages are instituted. I just wanted to let you know, because some people, not all not all marriages are, God approved. I just want to let you know. Marriage, because if you go there and you take away somebody, you cause somebody's marriage to break up, and now you want that husband or that man or that woman to be your wife, and you cause that person to get divorced. God don't honor that marriage. And if you are gonna go, if you are gonna get married to somebody that you are a Christian, and the person is not a Christian, the Bible said that we must not get entangled with unequally yoked. We must not get into relationship with and be unequally yoked, because there's gonna be a problem in the relationship. You can't say you are a Christian and you are going out there to marry somebody that worships Satan. That is two different opposite. That is two. That is, you gonna marry somebody that is a Christian. Are you gonna You're a Christian, you're gonna marry somebody that is a devil worshipper, and you're gonna get married. God don't approve that, because that is darkness and light. God don't approve of certain marriages. I'm not gonna get in. I'm not gonna come here and talk about all of the marriages that God don't approve of. So when we say we are married, and don't be and don't when we say that we are married, and we are gonna say what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Not every marriage God put together. That is why I always say, when you're going to get married, you must seek the counsel of God. You must ask Him to lead your way to find a good partner, so God can bless your marriage. So when you have problem in your marriage, you both can go to God and talk about it. And He will bless your marriage. Your marriage will be blessed and fruitful. So this is what I want to let you know. First of all, not every marriage is approved by God. I just want to set the record straight. So what I am saying to you guys is that Jesus was saying to the disciples that even though Moses put a commandment, it was a law that was written, that if a woman cheat on her husband, commit fornication in the marriage, or if the wife commit fornication, or the husband commit if the wife commit adultery, or the husband commit adultery, that's the only time you can get a divorce. But that was in Moses' time. So when the disciples asked him, under what circumstances should a man leave his wife, and vice versa, and Jesus was saying, Moses give them a commandment, that when if they commit adultery, then that's the only way that they could get a divorce, because um they have for they have broken the covenant, the contract of marriage, or the covenant of marriage. And that's the only way. But Jesus was saying, even though there was adultery, try your best to work out your marriage. Try your best to get counsels. Try your best to forgive each other. And when you forgive each other, the person that is in the wrong, when you get forgiveness, don't go back and do the same thing. Jesus is all about saving marriages. Jesus is not about um, divorce. He's not about that. He's saying try to save your marriage, but because of the hardness and our forgiving heart, when our parents sin against us, we are quick to get a divorce. So, in today's things that used to happen back then, in Moses' time, in terms of relationship, now when we are living in a new era. We have relationship where man and women are being physically abused. And if you are physically abused in any relationship, in a marriage, that you're gonna lose your life. God don't want us to stay in any marriage. And as a matter of fact, if you're in any relationship that that you're gonna your partner is beating you, physically abuse you to the point that you might lose your life, it was not God that sanctified that marriage. You did not go to God and ask God to find you a good husband. So if you had gone to God and asked God, I want a good husband, is this the husband for me? God would have shown you some red flag, because God would have known that this man is with physical abuse you, and one day kill you. So it could never be God that give you that husband. If you had seek God when you want to get married and ask him to provide a good husband for you, then you would not have end up with a man that is beating you. And now you want God to intercede. That is why the marriage covenant is a serious one. And when you're going into a covenant, a marriage covenant, you have to be careful of who you're gonna marry. You have to go down in fasting and praying if you want a good husband, and if you want your marriage to be happy, or if you want to grow together till your husband and you both of you grow to old age. You have to seek God, who is the author, the founder of marriage, who instituted the first marriage in the Garden of Eden. So if you want to have a good marriage and you want to have a good partner, seek the Lord before you go down the aisle and get married. So I am saying in today's time, if you are in any marriage that you find that your life is at risk, I just want to let you know that God did not sanction that marriage, because not all marriage are being God has put together. You can't run and go marry anybody without seeking guidance and seeking God to intervene, because you know the future. And then you say God, and then when trouble come, you in problem. Not everyone. For God to join you together, you have to go to God and help him to help you to find the right one. You have to involve God in this in your in finding a partner. So you can say God sanctioned it, or you're gonna say God has put you together when you was dating, or you were courting this man and this woman, or this woman, and you never talk to God about it. Then how you gonna say it God has put it together when you never seek his counsel to make sure you're gonna marry the right person? So we have to be very careful when we talk about what God has put together. Let no man asunder. Not every marriage are put together by God. So this is where, when the marriage is not put together by God, this is where problem come. Now the man is gonna go out here. As my question to you ladies, what would you do if your husband went out there and cheat on you and get another woman pregnant? Would you stay in the marriage and forgive him, or would you leave the marriage? And I could say maybe it depends too. It depends under what circumstances would you stay. So what you need to do is, if you ladies, if you find yourself in a situation, I'm advising you from the Bible, what God, what Jesus has said, that even though there is a law that said if there's found adultery in a marriage, you can get a divorce. But what he was saying, that even though there is a law that says that you can get a divorce, he's saying try to make your marriage work. Forgive your partner. If you forgive that partner, you find out that he has gone out there and he's committed adultery and he has gotten another woman pregnant. Now a child is in the picture. The man has to take care of the child. But that husband would know that is when he go and to look for that child, if he wants to take the child, if the wife is willing for him to take the child inside uh, of the marriage and take care of the child, so that he don't have any dealing, have too much dealing with that woman, with that child's mother. Then if the wife is so willing to take that, because some wife will say, all right, take the child, and and child home, and we'll take the child, will take care of the child. The child would have to, he would no and again, the child would have to have some interaction with his or her mother. So if the wife is willing to accept the child in, and if the mother out there would want to give the husband the child, and his wife would accept it, it would be best. But if that mother out there want to keep his child, then that that husband would have to go where that mother is. That husband would have to go and make sure that he take care of his child, and he look after his child, because if the child is, he can't desert the child. He still has to take care of the child. So even though the wife is gonna forgive him and of what he has done, he must now know that his wife has forgiven him. So when he go there to look for that child, go to that child, and they have some place where they meet to 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 um to spend time with the child. If he don't want to go to our home, they can meet at a mutual place. But what he must do, that he don't commit that sin again, that he don't go and have any relationship and committing any more adultery. He's gonna ask his wife for forgiveness, and he's gonna ask God for forgiveness, and then he's not gonna do that sin anymore. But there's a child to be taken care of. So when he goes to have any interaction with that woman out there, he has to know, no, that he his only responsibility right now is to make sure that child is taken care of, and nothing more. But if he's still gonna go out there and still having an affair after his wife forgive him of committing adultery out there and having a child outside of wedlock, if he keep on going on out there and still committing adultery with that woman, then the woman can do nothing more than file for divorce or leave him. But what Jesus is saying, try your best to forgive. And when you forgive the person that do the wrong, and the person that do the wrong, when you are forgiven, don't go back and do the same thing over and over again. Stop doing it. But if you keep on doing it after you've been forgiven, then it is best. There's no way out than to get a divorce. But Jesus is saying, even though there's a written law for divorce, and there's only one way you can get divorced is through adultery. But when you get the way, but seek to you get counseling, seek to forgive your partner, seek as best as possible to maintain, to stay in that marriage and don't get divorced. Because just as though Jesus will never leave the church, he's always there. Look here, we sin. Look here, we frustrate him. Look here, we turn away from him. He's always there. When we come back to him, he's willing to forgive us. So he wants marriage to be. So I am saying to you guys that we have to learn to forgive. I see some people getting divorced because them say them fall out of love, them getting a divorce because them the wife can't have no children and the husband can't get no children. They get a divorce because they them the things where the material things where them have, where them want, they can't get it because the husband can't provide it, or you know or maybe the wife can't provide it. So people get divorced for all some silly reasons and go and remarry. They are going against the will of God. So when you get a divorce, the Bible is saying to you, when you get a divorce, you should remain single. If your husband or the wife die, then you can remarry. But as long as husband is still alive, as even if you after even after getting a divorce, after adultery take place in the marriage, even after you get divorced and you separate, you're not supposed to go and marry. The only time the Bible says you can go and remarry if the partner is dead. When the partner is dead, then no, when that wife and husband is dead, or that wife or that husband is dead, then the contract is non and void, because that is why marriage is a contract between God, between you and God. That is a contract. So when the person, it is a binding contract between God, you, and the husband and the wife. So when the partner, when you get divorced after committing adultery, you should not, you should separate. You're not supposed to go and marry again until that one of the partner is dead. That is when you are, the Bible said that you're supposed to remarry. So tonight I just want to make it clear. But where my subscribers? When I need them most, I don't see anyone come up on my live. Guys, where are you? Where are you guys? Mm, in your hands, Lord, I surrender all. In your hands, Lord, I place today. In your hands, Lord, I place today and tomorrow. In your hands, Lord, I place today. I am unworthy. I'm not fit to be called a child of yours, but your grace and mercy has brought me through. Help us to always seek your face and your guidance. Where are where are my subscribers? Some of you guys don't that don't believe in the Bible. And this is saying how the Bible came to us. Because sometimes when I come on this live and I talk about God, some people will come out of the comment section and say there's no God. There's no God. And if you're gonna say there's no God and you don't believe in the Bible, then the conversation is done, because it's not my word that I'm gonna talk about. Is the word of God. Whatever I say will be coming from the word of God. and not from my own thoughts. So if you're gonna come to me and you don't believe the Bible, and you're gonna come on my comment section and you're gonna say you don't believe in the Bible is man-made and it is not the word of God, then I can have a conversation with you. There's no way I can tell you about God because everything that I say is coming from the word of God. So how the Bible came to us, let us examine. For some of you that say that the Bible is not real, is man-made, the books that made up the Bible are divided into two collections: the Old Testament, also known as the Jewish Scriptures or the Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament, the New Testament, the writings about Jesus and the first Christians. The very first manuscript of the books that make up the Old and the New Testaments have never been found, and most likely were out from continued use or were destroyed centuries ago. However, copies of these manuscripts were made by hand and became valued possession of the synagogues, the churches, and the monasteries. Before these copies were out, new copies were made, a process that continued from one generation to the next. Some very old copies of both the Old and the New Testaments writings have been preserved and are now stored in some of the world's most famous museums and libraries. It is not possible to know exactly when all the books of the Jewish scriptures were finally collected. Some of the writings in the Jewish scripture may go back as far as 1300 BC. BC means before Christ. But the process of bringing the books together may not have begun until around 400 BC. This collecting of books continued while new books were being written as late as the 2nd century BC, and the process of deciding which books would be part of the official Jewish scripture went on until almost AD 100. When the New Testament books were written, the Greek language was understood all over the Mediterranean world. But by the late 2nd century AD, local language were becoming popular as they had been in the days before the Greeks and the Romans came to dominate the land surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. To serve the needs of the churches, translations of the Bible were made into Latin, Coptic, and Syriac. In AD 383, Pope Damascus I assigned a scholar priest named Jerome to create an official translation of the Bible into Latin. It took Jermaine 27 years to translate the whole Bible. His translation came to be known as the Vulgate, and it served as the standard Bible in the Western Europe for the next 1,000 years. By the Middle Ages, only scholars could read and understand Latin. By, but by that time, Jonas Gutenberg invented the modern printing press around 1456. The use of the local language became acceptable in many official and religious settings. As more people began to learn to read, there was a new demand for the Bible in various local languages of Europe, and also translators like Martin Luther, William Tyndale, Cassiodor Renia and Giovanni, I can't even call them name, began to translate the Bible into language people spoke in their everyday life. The process of Bible translating continues today, and it has helped by many by some recent discoveries. For example, many ancient Greek manuscripts of the New Testament have been found in the last 150 years. In 1947, some very old manuscripts of the Jewish scriptures were found in caves just west of the Dead Sea in Israel. Wow. In 1947, some very old manuscripts of the Jewish scriptures were found in caves just west of the Dead Sea in Israel and have come to be known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. These manuscripts, which dated from between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century AD, have helped modern scholars to better understand the wording of certain biblical texts. The Bible is a very old book and has become to us the Bible is a very old book that has come to us because many people have worked hard copying and studying manuscripts, explaining, examining important artifacts and ancient ruins, and translating ancient texts into modern languages. This dedication has helped to preserve the many rich and inspiring stories, teaching the teaching, and poetry that make up the Bible. The Law. The first 5 books of the Bible are often known as the Book of the Law. They began with the creation of the world and then tell how God chose the Jewish people to follow him and the rules he set out for them. So the first book of the Bible, the first 5 books of the Bible, which is um, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are often known as the books of the law. They began with the creation of the world and then tell how God chose the Jewish people to follow him and the rules he set out for them. So Genesis, as we see, Genesis is the first book in the Old Testament. Genesis is where talk about creation. Genesis is where creation began. Creation is the first rebellion against God. So Genesis talk about creation. It talk about the first rebellion against God. It talk about how God has chosen Abram to follow him. It talks about the ups and downs of his descendants, of Abram's descendant, and the beginning of the nation of Israel. So in the book of Genesis, it tells you about the creation story. It talk about the first rebellion against God with Satan in heaven, or Lucifer rebel against, and God threw him out of heaven. It also talks about how God chose Abram to follow him. It talks about the ups and downs of Abram's generation, and it talks about the beginning of the nation of Israel. So that is Genesis. Then you look at Exodus, which is the second book of the New Testament. So Genesis is the second book of the Old Testament. So Exodus is the second book of the Old Testament. And what does Exodus talk about? The Exodus talk about the story of Moses, who led God's people out of slavery in Egypt and into the wilderness, where God gave them laws they must follow, including the 10 Commandments. So you see, the book of Exodus talks about the story of Moses, who God led, that God the book of Moses, who God chose to lead the people of Israel out of slavery. They were in slavery in Egypt, and God chose Moses to be the one that to go and tell Pharaoh, "Let my people go." So the book of Exodus talk about the Exodus story of how Moses led the children of Israel out of that was in bondage and slavery out of Egypt, and they went into the wilderness where God gave them laws that they must follow, including the Ten Commandments. Then the third book of the Old Testament, is Leviticus. Leviticus talks about rules about the right way for the Israelites to worship their completely holy God. So the book of Leviticus talks about rules. The rules are on the right way of the of the people of Israel and how they were to worship God. So Leviticus talks about the rules, the rules that was given to the children of Israel, how they should worship God. Then you look at and the other book of the fourth book of the Old Testament, and that is Numbers. Numbers talks about the stories of the struggles of the struggles of Israel as they wandered in the desert for 40 years, trying and failing to enter the promised land. So Numbers talk about tells you the story of the struggles of of Israel as they wandered in the desert for 40 years, trying and failing to enter the promised land because of their sin, because they had worshipped the golden calf. So then the fifth book of the Old Testament is Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy talks about this is the book where Moses retell the story of the Exodus, focusing on God's goodness, reiterating the rules. He finally dies, looking out over the land. So this book, Deuteronomy, talks about where Moses keep on retelling the story of the Exodus to the future, to the generation that came, you know, that after the children of Israel came out of Egypt and were in the wilderness, wandering for 40 years. This story, the book of Deuteronomy tells how Moses, or how the story of Moses was passed down to the generation that was in the wilderness during the time when they were wandering in the wilderness. They were a new generation, and this story was keep every generation. They were told, the future generation told them about the Exodus of how God used Moses to lead them out of Egypt, out of bondage, into the, out of slavery. So Deuteronomy talks about how Moses retaliate the story of the Exodus to the future generation. It focuses on God's goodness. It 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 focuses on the rules that were given to them while they were in the wilderness. They were wandering around in the wilderness and they were given rules to follow. So it talks about the rules that were given to follow while they were in the commandments of God and the rules, the laws, and all of those, the ceremonial law and the sacrificial law, the Passover, circumcision, the Ten Commandments, and all of those things were reiterated the way the children of Israel were supposed to follow those. So the book of Deuteronomy talks about those laws. He finally dies. The book of Deuteronomy talks about Moses was not able to go into the promised land, but he could look over and see the promised land, but he died before going into the promised land. Then we look at the book of the history now. So the first five books of the Bible is the law, is known as the law. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. These talks about the law of God. Then we're going to talk about history now. History. These are history. Joshua, Judges, Ruth, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Samuel, First and Second King, First and Second Chronicles is Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. These are history. So the first five books of the Bible is law. Is the law. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And And the books that deal with history are Joshua, Judges, Ruth, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Those are talks about a history. And let us look. Joshua. We know Joshua was the one that taken over from from Moses. So Joshua was the new leader of the Israelites, and he defeated Jericho and lead them into the promised land. So Joshua, the book of Joshua talks about how Joshua was the new leader that take over after Moses died, and he lead the children of Israel into Jericho, which so it talks about how Joshua defeated Jericho and lead the children of Israel into the promised land of Canaan. Then Judges. Judges talk is a series of leaders appointed by God, rescue Israel time and again from their mistakes. So the book of Judges talk about a series of leaders was appointed by God, and these leaders will rescue Israel every time Israel sinned against God. These were the judges that the Lord has appointed to set up. So when the children of Israel make mistake, they were supposed to face these judges and to face the consequences of their sin. Ruth. The story of Ruth is it talks about the story of a widow who finds a husband in Israel, her mother-in-law home country. So we know the book of Ruth. Ruth was Nehemiah daughter-in-law, but Nehemiah had two sons, and Ruth was one of her daughter-in-law. Her two sons done die, and no Naomi decided that she was going back to her home country, and Ruth decided that she wanted to go back with Naomi to her root, to her home country, to her culture, to her God, because Ruth was from another country that served another God. But Ruth wanted to go with Naomi, her mother-in-law. She went with him, and she found a husband that was Boaz. And we know that Boaz had Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David, king of Israel. What is the book of Samuel? We know the book of Samuel. Who was Samuel? Samuel was a great prophet. If you remember Samuel, Samuel was when Zachariah, he couldn't, he had two wives, Peninnah and Hannah. Hannah couldn't have any children, and every time Hannah go into the temple pray to God because she was being mocked by Zachariah, first wife, and Peninnah, because she was barren, and she used to mock her and laugh at her. So every day Anna would go in the temple and pray for God to give her a male child. God answers Anna's prayer, and he said, if you give me a male child, I will give this child unto you. So God finally answered Anna's prayer, and she became conceived and have Samuel. And Samuel, as Anna promised God that he would give the child back unto him, so Samuel was groomed was given back to God in terms of, she teach him to follow the laws and the commandments of God and grow him up in a godly way. And that was Samuel. Samuel became a great prophet, a great prophet in Israel, a mighty prophet in Israel. The Israelite wanted a king rather than judges. So God gets the prophet Samuel to appoint Saul, who later resists the rise of David, God's chosen successor. David, now king, rules as God desires for a while, but ends up committing adultery and struggling with troublesome sons, all anxious for power. So you see, the book of First and Second Samuel talk about the rise of Samuel. When Samuel was born, Samuel was a prophet, a mighty prophet. He was the one that anointed Saul, the first king of Israel, and he was also the one that anointed David to become king and they talk about David as king, and he was a good ruler, and then he commit sin, and that with Bathsheba, and they were trouble in the camp with David and his household because his sons wanted to kill him to take over the throne. So that is what we find in the book of Samuel. Then we look at First and Second Kings. King Solomon in this story in these two books, First and Second Kings, we learn about the story of King Saul. David's son became well, but begins well. So David's son Solomon ruled after David died, and he begins very well. But his many non-Israelite wives led him astray, and his death At his death, civil war led to separation into two states, Israel and Judah. Their respective king vary from quite good to very bad, especially Ahab, with only the prophet Elijah giving God's point of view. So we can see that the book of King, First and Second King, talk about how Solomon became king after David died. It talks about how um, Solomon was going on very good, but he married many non-Israelite wives that worship other gods, that were idol worshiping, and King Solomon allowed his wife to be, committing idolatry and even taking part in idolatry. And because of his sin, even though he repented in his old age before he died, but because of this sin and his non-Israelite wives, these children that he had, these wives introduced them to idol worshiping. So when Solomon died, the Israel was split into two. Israel was split, they said, into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, Israel and Judah. And these two kings, the king, no, there was a king of Israel, we call it the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. They were kings in and the two kings in these kingdom. The kings in these two kingdoms, they were wicked. One of them were wicked and one of them were good. And because of that simple sin that Solomon did, because he married a lot of non-Israelite wives that worship gods, and brought sin into the camp, caused the separation of the children of Israel into two, split them into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Despite Elijah's call to follow God, Israel in the north has a bad run of kings, and Judah only some good ones. In the end, both kings fell as a result of their betrayal of their God, which led them open to invasion, and God's people were led away into exile again. So we could see that the northern kingdom and the northern kingdom was Israel. They had bad kings. So because of Solomon's sin, he married non-Israelite wives that worship other gods, and Solomon allowed his wife to lead him astray, to start to follow them in idol worshiping. And the children that he had with these wives, the wives were teaching them idolatry. So when Solomon died, these children that he had were participating in idolatry. So because of that sin, even though Solomon asked for forgiveness, it has really the foundation has already been set. So after he died, Israel were split into two, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom consists of Judah, Levi, and Benjamin. And the other tribes were Israel and and these three tribes were the southern kingdom. And two these two kingdom, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, have kings. The kings of the king in the northern kingdom of Israel were wicked kings. The kings in the southern kingdom were, they were better because they were following the commandments of God. But somewhere along the line, the southern kingdom began to come go into idol worshiping. So both kingdom now, the southern kingdom and the north kingdom, were taken into idolatry, and because of the idol worshiping and not following the commandments of God, God allowed them to be taken. Because of their sin, they were taken into exile, into captivity. Remember, they were coming out of exile, out of captivity in Egypt, and now because of their sin, now they are taken back into Assyrian the northern kingdom were taken into Assyrian captivity, and the southern kingdom were taken into the captivity of Babylon, the Babylonian captivity. After the split, after these two kingdoms split, they never to really come back together. They never really come back together, because after this northern kingdom was split into I think it's Assyrian captivity. For years they start to mingle. They live in those countries, and children were born unto them, and those children were worshiping idols. And then you have the southern kingdom were taken captive into Babylon. Some of them lost their way. They mingle with the people, and so the kingdom, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, begin to last their way totally. I don't think they ever come back together as one again. So we look at um, First and Second Chronicles. First and Second Chronicles. What does the book of the Chronicles? What does Chronicles talk about? It talks about a long genealogy, the genealogy of the children of Israel. It keeps the records, the genealogy records of the children of Israel, followed by the story of King David, with much of its material similar to that in Second Samuel. It talks about it continues where the First Chronicles leaves off, dealing with many of the same events as First and Second Kings about Judah up to the exile. So it talk about First Chronicles, and the First Chronicles talk about the genealogy of the children of Israel. It talk about some aspect of King David that was mentioned in Kings. This Second Chronicles continues to talk about the First Chronicle, where it continues from where the First Chronicles leave off, dealing with many of the same events that was in First and Second Kings. It talks about it. So first, Second Chronicles is really going back and reiterating what happened in the First Chronicles, what happened in First and Second King. So it's a repeat of some of those stories. What happened to Judah um, before they were, before and after they were taken into exile. Ezra, no. Ezra. Ezra is Cyrus' empire of Persia. It talks about, in the book of Ezra, it talks about Cyrus, who was the empire of Persia, and he commands the Jews to return to their country. Ezra became their leader in rebuilding Jerusalem. So right here we are seeing where Ezra was a prophet, and while they were in captivity in Persia, Cyrus was an empire was an empire of Persia, and Cyrus allowed the children of Israel to, you know he commands them to go back into their country and rebuild Jerusalem. So, Nehemiah. What does the book of Nehemiah talk about? Nehemiah's involvement in rebuilding Jerusalem alongside Israel. So, Nehemiah was one of the prophets along with Israel that will help build back, um, rebuild back Jerusalem after they were released from Persia captivity. Esther. What does the book of Esther talk about? Esther, a young woman, is chosen as queen from among the Jewish captives in Persia. So we can remember that Esther became the queen of Persia. And so Esther, a young woman, is chosen as queen from among the Jewish captives in Persia and defeats the prime minister in his plan to wipe out the Jews. So right here, I will look at the books that concern. We look at the books that are talks about the laws, and we talk about the books that talk about the history. So I'm gonna stop for now, and we continue with the books that talk about poetry. At another live, I will talk about the books of the Old Testament that talks about poetry. But right now, let me re-emphasize. The first 5 books of the Old Testament talks about the law. The first 5 books of the Old Testament talks about the law. It is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. These are the first 5 books of the Old Testament or the Bible, and it talks about the law. The books that talks about history are Joshua, Judges, Ruth, First and Second Samuel, First and Second King, First and Second Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. And later on, we are going to look at the books in another live with the books that talk about poetry, a lot of poetry. So, guys, I'm going to end this live tonight. I don't see a lot of you coming on this live, but anyway, I'm going to end this live. I hope you subscribe, you like the video, you subscribe.